God is calling us to do good work, and nothing could be farther from the truth. There is a lesson in our planning. There is a lesson in being under construction. I don't mean under construction when you click on a website and it says under construction if you get no information. I'm talking about the inspiration we received that day from being with you and knowing that we were in a place where we were invited, where we were appreciated, and where we were loved. And so your pastor always promised two things. She said, when the sanctuary is completed, we want you to come and preach. And this is not just busy work on the part of a congregation. This facility, the sanctuary, and all parts of our campus are to the glory of God and to the testimony of the ministry and mission that we are leading and will continue to lead. And so being in that space this morning was a blessing. I did see it when I was here, and it was under construction. I remember the Sunday morning when my husband and I came for worship, and we worshiped here because it was under construction. So this feels like completing a wonderful circle, and I want you to know how privileged I am to be with you today. We heard the passage of scripture read from Hebrews 11, and I recall the context of the 11th chapter of Hebrews within the larger book of Hebrews. Hebrews is all about faith and about this new covenant we have in God. You remember the old manifestation, this sort of works righteousness where we felt like we had to earn our way and earn God's acceptance by our good works. But thanks be to God. Thanks be to the gift of God's grace and salvation in Jesus Christ. This is no longer the case. And so we find in Hebrews what I like to think about as this pantheon of faithful heroes and sheroes who came before the new dispensation. They came before Jesus Christ, but it was accorded to them by virtue of their faith that they also would receive God's blessing and receive God's incredible salvation. You recognize some of the names in the lineup. I know I do, some from when I was a child. You remember the names of Abraham and Sarah. You remember names such as Noah. You remember Enoch. You remember some of the names that we heard as children, learned in Sunday school. You may have heard them more recently in your faith walk as an adult if you came to the church a little later in life. And these are all people who, in one way or another, trusted God, stepped out on faith, and here is the thing to remember. They believed what they did not see. Hence, the title of the message for this morning, More Than a Design. When you enter into conversation, discernment, and prayer about remodeling your sanctuary, you may have had architectural plans and blueprints. I imagine you did. But you really had to trust and believe that somehow plans on paper, renderings online, maybe even the model that we often have, that 3D model that excites everyone with the little trees and cars and those kinds of facsimiles for us, would actually translate into something that looks like the day that we celebrate today. Most of us aren't architects. We aren't engineers. We are not versed in construction, and yet we know people do that work. And somehow the Spirit of God works and brings together and connects in amazing ways design on paper, prayers of the people, faith in God and in people to do what they say they will do, and brings it all together in wonderful time. Early this morning, I shared the story of a congregation that I remember that engaged in a process I imagine similar to yours. As you know, we don't have a denomination where people just decide one day, a handful of folks, we're going to remodel something, and then they use church funds and do that because 10 people think it's a great idea. So you had church conferences, Your plans went before the East Central District, location and building, very possibly. There's a process of approval, and you went through the required steps for your project. Well, that was probably the case with this church from a long time ago. But it's more than a design when the plans and people's hearts don't connect. And so in this particular instance, once the decision was made to go with a particular design, there were folks who disagreed. Now, a disagreement is one thing. A compromise, and that's the term I used earlier this morning, is another thing. When we compromise, we know from the outset that we're prepared not to get everything we want. If we get everything we want, then it's not a compromise. So we're prepared for the fact that there may have to be some give and take. Sometimes the compromises maybe aren't that big of a deal. They aren't that significant. Would it really matter to you if you came in and the pews were padded, say in red cloth or blue? You might have a preference, but that probably isn't the stuff of your faith. Sometimes the compromises are more. Is it a one-story building? Will it be a two-story building? Will it have a contemporary space such as your church has, and a more formal